And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Now TV and Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I do appreciate you being with me. We are currently involved, and have been for the last several years now, a study of the challenge of Christ. Now, very quickly, just as a reminder, the challenge of Christ is found in John chapter 10, verse 37. Jesus said, "Do not believe me for my words' sake, believe me for my works. If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." I've shared with you before how this challenge is unique to Christianity. Jesus was putting his very identity as the Son of God on the firing line. And he was saying, look, prove me wrong if you can. On another occasion, in John chapter 8, Jesus was in the midst of a hostile audience. And he just turns to them as they're trying to find fault, as they're trying to condemn. And he says, "Which of you condemns me of sin? Which of you finds fault with me?" And they couldn't do anything. And so this challenge of Christ is extremely critical. Now, obviously, the atheists, the skeptics, those who do not believe in Jesus, try to find fault with him. And I got to tell you, I interact with atheists somewhat, not extensively, but it just blows my mind from time to time when I encounter atheists and agnostics. It just blows my mind how facile, how ridiculous the objections to Christ truly are. In the huge majority of cases, I hear things like, well, the Bible just contradicts itself coming and going, and you ask them, show me a contradiction in the Bible, a genuine contradiction. And they come back with some of the silliest things. And what I'm getting at here is they come back with all of these objections, which they've heard from somebody that's heard from somebody that heard from somebody else who might have read a book somewhere at some time claiming that such and such was a contradiction. They've never studied the issue. They have never investigated forensically from an evidentiary perspective. They have never actually investigated the situation themselves. They just repeat what they've heard. And so very often when they talk about, well, here's a contradiction. And what just recently I was commenting on a video, an atheist video. And this individual says, well, the Bible is just full of contradictions. And I said, okay, show me one. And they said, well, you have the story of Jesus in the tomb and the women. Well, one account says that only one woman went, and another says 2 or 3 went, so that's a contradiction. I said, well, you got a problem here. Nowhere, not in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, nowhere does it say that only one woman went, or that only such and such a person went to the grave. I said, so you are trying to establish a false contradiction, an illegitimate contradiction. Look, folks, if we do not understand the rules of evidence, if we do not understand the rules of logic, at least to some extent, we may never have been formally trained in that, but we can study enough to know what the rules of evidence and what the rules of logic are. Let's just say, and let's talk about what a real contradiction is, and then I'll get into the lesson, because this is critical. We're dealing with the challenge of Christ. And the skeptics say Jesus contradicted himself, he failed, etc., etc. Anyway, what is a genuine contradiction? Okay, there's the door of my studio right there. Now, if I'm sitting here looking at that door, and I say to one person, the door of my studio is blue. It's not, it's cedar, but an illustration here. If I say to a person, the door of my studio is blue, and another person comes in, we're sitting in the same room, looking at the same door, the same side of the door, and I say, well, that door right there is red. Guess what? I've contradicted myself, or maybe I've gone colorblind. You see, they're extenuating circumstances. However, if this side of the door is blue and the other side of the door is red, guess what? I haven't contradicted myself. I haven't given the full story. I haven't said, well, this side is blue, the other side's red, which would have been the full story. But if I said the whole door, the entire door is blue, when in fact the other side was red, guess what? I've contradicted myself, and I've contradicted reality. Do you see how silly some of the objections against Christ truly are? Of people claiming that Jesus was a liar, he contradicted himself, he contradicted reality, etc., etc. These people, in so many cases, genuinely do not understand the rules or the laws of evidence. They do not understand the rules of logic. And so they set up false contradictions. And in doing so, they demonstrate they really haven't studied the issues at all. Okay. So we're involved in a study of the last days. Why? Well, because Christians have been saying for a long, long time, for centuries, we're in the last days. And Christ is to come at the end of the last days. And the atheist comes along, the skeptics, they come along and they say, well, Christians have been saying for all these years that Christ is going to come at the end of the Christian age. Well, he hasn't come yet, and here's what's critical about it. If Jesus had never, ever, ever said one word about the time of his coming, the timing of it, if he would have simply said, one of these days I will come, or had he simply said, I will come at the end of human history, or I will come at the end of the Christian age, then the skeptic would really have no issue whatsoever. They would have no argument whatsoever, because obviously the end of time hasn't happened. The end of the Christian age has not happened. The end of human history has not happened. But what has happened down through the centuries is that the Christian church has taught and continues, unfortunately, to teach, yes, Jesus predicted his coming at the end of the current Christian age. He said he was going to come at the end of time. He said he was going to come to bring history, human history, to a close. Well, here are a few interesting facts. Point number one, Jesus never, ever, ever used the term or the concept of the end of time. You can't find that term in any proper English translation of the Greek text. You can't find it at all. Now, look, folks, if the doctrine of the, quote, end of time, or the doctrine of the end of the Christian age, the end of human history, if that was a valid doctrine, then given the fact that the Bible speaks so much about the coming of the Lord and the end of the age, the time of the end, the last day, okay, given how pervasive that doctrine is, then if it's true that the end of the age, if it's true that Jesus was predicting the end of time and the end of human history, don't you think he should have given some teaching that was so clear, so emphatic, so undeniable that literal physical creation would come to an end and that material creation would be destroyed and human history would come to an end. Don't you think we would have teaching so clear on that it could not be denied? And about this time, I can hear skeptics say, well, look, Preston, we do have it. Look at 2 Peter chapter 3. The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the earth and the elements that are therein shall be burned up. See? Heaven and earth are going to be destroyed. And as I said just recently on that blog, that atheist video blog that I mentioned a moment ago, some of the atheists were saying exactly that. Jesus very clearly said he was going to come out of heaven on a cloud with the angels. Well, he very clearly said he was. And yes, Peter very clearly spoke of the day of the Lord in which the earth and the elements would be burned up, or more literally, more correctly, shall be discovered or shall be found. But nonetheless, yeah, they said that. But as I pointed out on that blog, when they point out what the text says, they are assuming that the original authorial intent, in other words, the original intention of Jesus' words and Peter's words are supposed to be taken literally and physically instead of metaphorically. What I've been sharing with you, ladies and gentlemen, and I've been sharing with you these facts in regard to the identity of the last days. And don't forget, I've written a book entitled The Last Days Identified. It is a comprehensive study of every single biblical use of the term last days that give us any detail whatsoever. And in that book, I demonstrate that the term, please pay careful attention here, and please catch the power of what I'm about to say. In the Bible, every single occurrence of the term the last days that gives us any detail whatsoever is invariably a reference to the last days of the Old Covenant age of Israel, that age that came to an end in AD 70 with the destruction of the temple and the dissolution of the city Jerusalem. Now, if you've never heard that, I understand that can be shocking. It was to me when I started learning it, and I had no one to teach it to me, just strictly through my study of scriptures. So, with that said, I've been sharing with you a study based on Isaiah chapters 2 through 4 of the identity of the last days. Now, why have I chosen Isaiah chapters 2 through 4? I'm doing that because Isaiah 2 through 4 is one of the pivotal Old Testament prophecies of the last days. It includes the prediction of the day of the Lord. It's therefore critically important that we understand how Isaiah, this critical, foundational Old Testament prophecy of the events of the last days, how did Isaiah define and describe the last days? Did he describe it as an end-of-time event? No, and I'll prove that later on as we continue. Did he describe it as the end of human history? Absolutely not. He described it as the time of the judgment of Old Covenant Jerusalem and the temple, and thus the end of the Old Covenant age, at the coming of the day of the Lord. That's how Isaiah chapters 2 through 4 identify and define and describe the last days. Now, why is this so important to our study of the challenge of Christ? I hope you understand that now, already by now, but let me lay it out very simply, very clearly. If the last days is not a referent to the end of the current Christian age, if the term the last days is not a reference to the end of human history, the end of time, then that strips the atheist and the skeptic and the unbeliever, including the Jews, including the Muslims, of their charge against Christ when they claim, unfortunately using traditional Christian teaching, but it strips them again of their objection to Christ because they take the traditional Christian teaching. Oh yeah, Jesus predicted the end of time. Oh yes, Jesus predicted a literal physical coming of the Son of Man out of heaven at the end of time in human history. But wait, if we are establishing, and we are, if we are establishing that the last days is not a reference to the end of time, it's not a reference to the last days of the Christian age, and if we establish, therefore, that the day of the Lord of the last days has nothing to do with the literal, visible, bodily coming of Jesus out of heaven in a physical body, then we have literally stripped all of the skeptics of their argument, of their objection against Jesus. Because they are arguing, vehemently so in many cases, oh, everybody knows Jesus plainly said he was coming back. Yes, he did. At the end of the age. So if the end of the age is not the end of the Christian age and not the end of time, then Jesus wasn't predicting his coming at the end of time. And he wasn't predicting his coming to destroy literal physical heaven and earth. Do you see the implications of what I'm sharing with you as we study the challenge of Christ? Okay, let me show you how this prophecy of Isaiah chapter 2 through 4 strips the atheists of their objection against Jesus by showing, number one, that everyone has to admit that at least part of Isaiah's prophecy has been fulfilled. And number two, because it tells us about the nature of the kingdom that Christ would establish in the last days and perfect at his coming at the day of the Lord in the judgment of the wicked. Okay, in Isaiah chapter 2, we've already examined the fact that in the last days, the Mount of the Lord's house would be established. That's the establishment of the Messianic kingdom, the establishment of the Messianic temple. Now, I've already shown you, ladies and gentlemen, just go back over the last 2 or 3 videos, that the Messianic temple was not to be a literal, physical temple in literal, physical Jerusalem. I have shown you that Jesus Christ himself is the living chief cornerstone of the Messianic temple. The foundation stones of the temple of God are the apostles and prophets. Now look, folks, not only is this devastating against dispensationalism, it is devastating against the skeptics who appeal to this Christian doctrine, unquote, and who say, well, look, all these Christians over here, they claim that we're looking for a literal physical Jerusalem to be restored, a literal physical temple in Jerusalem to be restored. And look, they claim they're in the process of building it. They claim they're in the process of anointing priests and gathering the materials. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, if dispensationalists are wrong in saying that we're waiting for a literal physical Jerusalem temple to be built, if the Messianic temple was itself to be and is a non-literal, that is to say a non-physical, a non-visible temple, then not only is dispensationalism falsified, but guess what? The atheist has lost his argument against Christianity. Because the church is the body of Christ. The church is the temple of God. 1 Corinthians 3:16, 1 Corinthians 6:19 and following. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, 14 and following. Folks, do you catch the power of this? Let me reiterate it. If in fact the prediction of the Messianic temple which would be established in the Messianic kingdom, if that temple is the spiritual body of Christ, and we are not looking for a literal physical temple to be built in a restored Jerusalem, not only is dispensationalism falsified, but the atheist has lost his argument against Christianity. You simply must catch how powerful an argument this is. So let's continue, running out of time already. Isaiah chapter 2. And many people in the establishment of the Messianic temple, in the establishment of the Messianic kingdom, many people come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Well, guess what? The writer of Hebrews, in writing to the saints 2,000 years ago, said, "You have not come to Mount Sinai. You have not come to a mountain that burned with fire and had thunder. And if so much as an animal touched that mountain, it was to be thrust through with a spear. Oh no, you have come to Mount Zion." Wait a minute. What did Isaiah say? The word of the Lord will go forth from Zion. Well, the book of Hebrews is all about the new covenant emanating from that Zion. It is emanating from the heavenly city. Hebrews chapter 11, 13 to 16. Not an earthly city. And thus, when he says, "You have come to Mount Zion," they've come to the Messianic temple, because Zion was the location of the Messianic temple. Oh, wait a minute. When the writer of Hebrews says, "You have come to the heavenly Jerusalem," he's not saying that they had approached a literal, physical, restored city of Jerusalem, right? If we have any atheists in our audience, do you catch the power of that? Not only that, he says, "You have come to the heavenly Jerusalem." The church of the living God. Now that tells us, ladies and gentlemen, that this Zion of Isaiah chapter 2, and by the way, Hebrews tells us that he is living in the last days foretold by Isaiah. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past by the fathers, has in these last days. Folks, he said that 2,000 years ago. And he spoke of his day, his generation, as the last days, and said God was speaking to them in those last days through Jesus, through the Messiah, and that word of Christ, teaching, instructing, was going forth from where? From Zion, from the heavenly Jerusalem. What does this do? How does this instruct the skeptic? It goes to the very heart of the matter by showing, once again, dispensationalism, the dominant eschatology of American Christianity, is absolutely false to say we're looking for a restored physical Jerusalem. No, the writer of Hebrews is reflecting on the Old Testament prophecies of the reestablishment of Zion, and says, "You have come to Zion." He didn't say, "You come to a type or a shadow of Zion." He didn't say, "Well, yeah, we've sort of kind of got a Zion, but we're looking, and we got a spiritual Zion, but we're looking for the real Zion." He didn't say this, ladies and gentlemen. The writer of Hebrews is focused on, with laser beam accuracy, he is focused on the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. And throughout the book of Hebrews, he is focused on one key fact. Jesus Christ, the Messiah and the King of the heavenly Jerusalem, the heavenly Zion, the heavenly city, he is better. That's the key note word of the book of Hebrews. Christ is himself better than Moses. Hebrews 3. He's better than the angels. Hebrews chapter 1. He is better than the Levitical priest. Hebrews 5 through 7. He serves in a better, more perfect, heavenly temple. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 1 and 2. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 24. He has a better covenant with better promises than the old covenant. His sacrifice is better than any sacrifice that they could offer under the old covenant. Do you get the point, ladies and gentlemen? Now remember, he says Christ serves in the true, the better, the heavenly temple. Thus, when Isaiah says in the last days the mountain of the Lord's house is going to be established, and Christ had established this better, this perfect, this heavenly tabernacle, why would we ever be looking for a literal, physical temple in Jerusalem to be restored with physical, animal, bloody sacrifices restored? And especially is this question pertinent when Hebrews chapter 10, 5 and 7 says, in those sacrifices, in burnt offerings and offerings for sin, you, that is Yahweh, had no pleasure. Why? Well, because they could never take away sin. Christ's temple, the temple of Isaiah chapter 2, the temple, the God of the house of Jacob, is that perfect, heavenly, non-physical temple. The atheist, therefore, has no argument against Christianity. I'm out of time. I'll see you next week.